removal of Robert Mugabe as president of Zimbabwe in November led to several Mugabe loyalists going underground. The most prominent of these is probably Jonathan Moyo, until recently a cabinet minister, key ally and close advisor to Robert Mugabe and his wife, Grace. He's been described as one of the most hated men in Zimbabwe and is wanted in the country on corruption charges. Jonathan Moyo is now in hiding in self-imposed exile and says his family is being harassed and that his life is under threat. We cannot disclose his location at his request. This is his first interview since the ousting of President Mugabe. What has he got to say for himself? Jonathan Moyo, welcome to Hard Talk. Why have you gone into hiding and not wished to disclose your whereabouts?
It is because of the extraordinary situation that exists in Zimbabwe following the unconstitutional overthrow of the government in a military coup that took place on the 15th of November. And on that day, the military specifically targeted my house and myself with a clear intention to cause harm. And that's why I am not in the country, although I left the country legally. I am not at liberty to disclose my whereabouts because they have shown a very clear and determined intention to find me and harm me wherever I am.
You've talked about worries about your life and threats and harassment and so on. What's the evidence for that?
It's common cause in Zimbabwe. I've even put that evidence on my Twitter feed on the morning of the 15th of November, around 2:30 a.m. Zimbabwean time. Some between 15 to 25 heavily armed SAS soldiers came to my residence and they destroyed the gate, destroyed the entrance, the door to my house, and shot their way into every room looking for me. But fortunately, they did not find me, and none of the members of my family were there because I had been forewarned the previous night that I should not spend the night at my house and that I should take every member of my family with me
out of the house, and the evidence, physical evidence of what then happened to my house has been there for anyone to see.
All right, so where did you go then? Where did you go? Reports are that you went with your family to Robert Mugabe's mansion and that they were allowed to stay but you were refused. Is that what happened?
That is false. I'm glad that the military people who wanted to harm me on the night of the coup don't actually know what happened, and they've been peddling falsehoods about the circumstances. What I would say, without putting in jeopardy many of God's people who were very kind to give me assistance, is that it is true that I took my family with me on the night of the 14th of November to my colleague's residence, and my colleague being Xavier Kasukuwere, who was then Minister of Local. And the amazing fact is that his house was also attacked about the same time when my house was being attacked, when I was there with my family. It was him and his family, and altogether there were 11 of us at his residence when the residence was attacked.
So that's where you went. But you know that Xavier Kasuku and you are one of the most wanted men from Zimbabwe, and in fact the former finance minister Ignatius Chombo is in prison. How did you manage to escape Zimbabwe? You say you left legally, but yet on the other hand you've just described how the army and the authorities were coming after you.
Yes. When they came to attack Xavier Kasukuwere's house about 2:30 a.m. On the 15th of November, they subjected it to some 15 minutes of gunfire, and amazingly, after those 15 minutes, and they had surrounded the house, the sounds of gunfire just went silent, and we waited there for, I think, something like 10 minutes, and there was no movement or sign of any presence of these special forces that had surrounded the house and shot at it from every angle. And we then managed to get out of the house, and we were amazed that they were no longer there. They probably.
So how did you leave the country? So you've explained how the army have attacked both your house and Savio Kafuguzad, but how did you actually leave Zimbabwe? And the other question I asked you was, why do you now fear for your life since you've left the country? I mean, are you receiving more death threats where you are? And how did you flee the country? How did you leave the country?
I left Zimbabwe with the help of people who to me are angels, because they saved lives. And I'm not at liberty to say who helped me, how they helped me, and how I left Zimbabwe, except to say I left Zimbabwe when President Mugabe was the president of the country, and I left with the assistance of these people legally. I left the country legally. I managed to escape the net of the military people and to be where I am legally.
So, but do you not think that, as I said, you know, you've got the new Zimbabwean government saying they've got Interpol, they want Interpol to help them locate you and a couple of others, the most wanted, some say most hated men in Zimbabwe, because you were, of course, very, very close to Robert Mugabe. It's going to be a matter of time, isn't it, before you are returned to the country?
Well, fortunately, there's something called international law. I want to make clear that when I left Zimbabwe, there was no warrant of arrest against me, and there was only a death warrant, and we have incontrovertible evidence in black and white, a documentation that shows what the intention of the junta in Harare was with regard to my security as well as that of my colleagues. They have, since their coup, started framing all sorts of political charges in the guise of criminal charges. They said they were targeting the so-called criminals surrounding President Mugabe, but we now know that they were talking about political criminals. They have not come up with any crimes that rise to the level of charges that would warrant the interest or attention of Interpol. These are people in pursuit of a political agenda. They believe that we committed political crimes by supporting President Mugabe and not supporting them.
Right.
So this is a very strange and unique definition of criminals only applicable to Zimbabwe. But I repeat, there is international law. Yes, everything will finally...
There's also Zimbabwean law, and the government has said that it wants, the president, Mnangagwa, wants to track down $2 billion of state funds that have disappeared through corruption, and the reports suggest that you are wanted for allegedly stealing assets under the systemic corruption that we know existed under the Mugabe years. That is why they want you.
There is no such evidence that they've put anywhere. They are going after people who they allege were hoarding beans, rice, and such things.
Well, no, you're one of the people they say was involved in systemic corruption. Let me just tell you what Ibo Mandaza, a political analyst and former ZANU-PF member, has said. He talks about the new government's delicate handling of the old man, Robert Mugabe, but they've they'll make an example of Grace Mugabe and some others around her, even though the corruption goes much bigger. You were one of Grace Mugabe's key allies, part of the so-called G40 faction that was trying to maneuver her as successor to Robert Mugabe. So you are really top of the list when it comes to the people who are wanted for this alleged corruption.
First of all, it is not corrupt to support a particular politician to become any office holder, whether it's vice president, president. It can't be a crime in a constitutional democracy. It is false to allege that there was an attempt to elevate Dr. Grace Mugabe, the former First Lady. What is really going on here is that there is a group of people that sees itself as the stockholders of Zimbabwe. And this group is led by Emmerson Mnangagwa, who is now president. But de facto, the control of this group is by General Chiwenga, the former
well, he's the vice president now. He's the vice president now.
Who is the vice president now? But he's vice president because of a military coup. But he has not been voted into that office.
No, but the
if you grab power by force,
can I just say,
you then must find excuses to justify that grab. And this is what they are doing.
You are questioning the Emmerson Mnangagwa, the new president. World reaction has, by and large, welcomed him. Rex Tillerson, US Secretary of State. Zimbabwe has an extraordinary opportunity to set itself in a new path. British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, I'm encouraged by President Mnangagwa's words so far. Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, said to him, Germany will support you as a partner in your endeavours to start a new chapter in the history of Zimbabwe. That is the reality you're facing now. You can criticise what has happened as much as you like, but that is what the world is saying. It's accepted.
Yes, it's not the world which chooses the leaders of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has a constitution, and Mnangagwa and Chiwenga, they know only too well that they have come into power via the bullet and not the ballot. The constitution of Zimbabwe requires people to come into power via the ballot.
Well,
and the people of Zimbabwe will decide. I mean, if the world wants to be at odds with the popular will of the people of Zimbabwe, that is up to them. We can only be concerned about the Republic of Zimbabwe, the views of the people of Zimbabwe. The international conspiracy that supports a dictatorship that has come to power via the bullet is another story, will not be experienced by the Zimbabweans for the first time.
Well, he's promised free and fair elections in August this year. You've talked
he can't hold free and fair elections. You cannot, there has never been a single case, Zainab, of a government that has come to power via the bullet.
You talked of conspiracy, but what is it you want? Because in one of your tweets since Mugabe lost power, you said to the new leadership in Zimbabwe, if you and your lot think that this will last, then you ain't seen nothing yet, come rain or shine. Are you plotting?
No, Zimbabwe, in spite of this coup, Zena, the fact of the matter is Zimbabwe has come of age. It is a country of laws. We have a new constitution, and this is a constitution that the people of Zimbabwe made for themselves. And it has been broken, and it has been broken via a coup. And if anyone out there thinks that the Zimbabweans are going to embrace the coup and entrench these leaders, when they know a very worrying fact, Zena, right now, the cabinet of the Republic of Zimbabwe is led by the most feared people in the history of this country. They are feared because they are associated with every atrocity that has happened from Kukuraundi to Mrambatsvina. The people of Zimbabwe cannot be expected to embrace the most feared individuals.
What do you want? A return to the status quo ante? You want to see a return of Robert Mugabe and Grace Mugabe as his possible successor? Is that what you'd like to see?
Every thinking, right-thinking Zimbabwean would like to see the restoration of constitutionalism and legitimacy in Zimbabwe. It is not about any individual. It is about the rule of the law. The constitution of the country has been subverted, and there has to be a return to constitutionalism. And we do not expect the very same people who overthrew the constitution to restore it. And there's a lot that gets said about Mugabe. I want to put on record that I, for one, I'm very, very happy, proud of the fact that I served with him and under him.
And then you backed Grace Mugabe, who is by and large not admired at all in the country. Are you happy to see her still have chances of getting into power?
Zainab, the fact that some people, and who may in fact be a minority, have issues with Dr. Grace Mugabe does not mean it is a crime to support her. No one can sustain that view. It is only the people who decide who will lead them through an election. You do not prevent an election through a military coup simply arguing that you do not like Grace Mugabe. It's unprofessional for an army to do that. The Zimbabwean army under Chiwenga has joined the ranks of banana republics where military individuals intervene because they don't like this individual, they like that individual. They've reduced our country into a country of good guys versus bad guys.
Have you spoken?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Grace Mugabe was not only the First Lady, she was also the Secretary for Women's Affairs in the ruling party. And that position, Zainab, is a very serious position. And as a leader, a top leader in the party, she was entitled, one, to discharge a program, and two, express her views about who should occupy whatever office. She was entitled to that.
Have you spoken to her? Have you spoken to her? She's not been seen since the removal of her husband from power. Have you spoken to her, or for that matter, Robert Mugabe?
No, I haven't, because of the circumstances that have arisen. I look forward to doing so, especially to speaking to President Mugabe. President Mugabe, Zainab, is Zimbabwe's Castro. But unfortunately, Zimbabwe is not Cuba, and Zimbabweans are not Cubans, because our politics have been influenced by our neo-colonial relationship with the white settler economy and with Britain.
You said you're proud of having served under Robert Mugabe. You've talked about his legacy. His legacy, for example, is that 3/4 of Zimbabwe's population live on less than $5.50 a day. A quarter of Zimbabwe's children under the age of 5, 27% of them, experience stunted growth. The Trades Union Congress in Zimbabwe says that there's 90% unemployment. I could go on and on. You are Higher Education Minister. The fees for a term at a university in Zimbabwe is $1,000 a term. So it's become really something that only the privileged few can enjoy. I mean, that's just an example of the legacy that you talk about.
No, that is not the legacy. That's what you are calling the legacy. You are identifying certain challenges that the Republic of Zimbabwe has, and you say that this is the legacy. No, that is a very strange definition of legacy. We accept, as we did even as we were in government, that there were challenges facing the country. We know what the reasons for some of those policy challenges are. But unfortunately, the president put faith in the people who have now turned against him and who used his assignment of responsibility to in fact plot his downfall.
But you were part of a government, as I said, which this current government says now that you were part of the systemic corruption. We've heard press reports of your lavish home in Harare.
My home is a very modest home in the neighborhood. There's nothing extraordinary about it.
Described as
I built that house when I was not in government. I worked very hard in order to get that house built. I am very proud. You people can create as many, but the truth of the matter is you will not find a single case where I took a cent to build anything for myself or my family.
Are you talking to an intermediary about your own future and whether make some kind of deal or immunity from prosecution?
You cannot discuss those issues with an illegal regime. And an illegal regime is one that comes into power against the Constitution, in violation of the Constitution. That regime may be in effective control of the territory, but it is an illegal regime. It is an illegitimate regime. They came in saying they wanted to have elections within 6 months. We know that when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga went to Morgan Tsvangirai's house, and Morgan Tsvangirai, the opposition leader in Zimbabwe, they pretended that they were concerned about his health and so forth. But we know they wanted to negotiate with him to postpone elections for at least 3 years.
About you. What
they
will
are
you do?
afraid of elections. They don't want to have free and fair elections.
What will
they are
you do?
incredible elections.
What will you do?
Sorry?
What will you do? Do you want immunity from prosecution? Do you want to go back to Zimbabwe?
We would, every Zimbabwean who cares about the country would like to see a return to constitutionalism. That is the fundamental. We must have the rule of law. The army deployed itself in Zimbabwe when the constitution says only the president can deploy it. Now, when you have people who have deployed themselves, taken over all the institutions of the state and government, you don't discuss immunity with them.
But if you were to be offered it, would you go back? If you were to be offered it, would you go back?
When the devil offers you immunity, you would be a fool to enter into what is called a Faustian bargain.
So what will you do? Where will you live? I mean, there have been press reports that you asked the Kenyan authorities for asylum and that this was refused. Where will you go?
No, but these are false reports. These are false. You know, there have been all sorts of reports fishing for my whereabouts. I want to tell you, Zena, what you know. You can't have people become stateless just because some individuals have grabbed power in their home country. That's not international law. We do not live in the jungle anymore. So these questions will resolve themselves in the fullness of time.
So how is Jonathan Moyo going to live? Be forever a fugitive on the run? Where are you going to live?
You cannot be a fugitive. I want to remind you, when I left Zimbabwe, there was no warrant of arrest against me. I did not run away from any warrant of arrest. I ran away, if you want to use those terms, from a death warrant, an unlawful attack on my house by military people. There is no one anywhere in the world who will simply sit there and say, come and attack me, come and kill me. You do not implement justice by sending armed soldiers to attack a civilian residence. So I'm not bothered about that question because at some point the rule of law and constitutionalism will speak. Zimbabweans are already demanding, they want to know what happened to President Mugabe. He was humiliated by the very same people who were saying they want to restore his legacy, who were claiming to be targeting others around him, when in fact they were targeting Mugabe. And they targeted him in a very humiliating and totally unacceptable way. Zimbabweans there, forget about me. Zimbabweans in the country are asking fundamental questions about what happened, why it happened, and they wanted to see restoration of the rule of law, constitutionalism in Zimbabwe, and they will get it.
Jonathan Moyo, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.